I want you all to take a look around and find someone you don't know. Maybe somebody who doesn't look kind of like you. Maybe somebody who might be of a different religion than you. Maybe they come from a different country. My question now to you is, are you willing to fight for that person who you don't even know as much as you're willing to fight for yourself? Are you willing to stand together and fight for those people who are struggling economically in this country? Are you willing to fight for young people drowning in student debt, even if you are not? Are you willing to fight to ensure that every American has health care as a human right, even if you have good health care? Are you willing to fight for frightened immigrant neighbors, even if you are native born? Are you willing to fight for a future for generations of people who have not yet even been born, but are entitled to live on a planet that is healthy and habitable? Because if you are willing to do that, if you are willing to love, if you are willing to fight for a government of compassion and justice and decency, if you are willing to stand up to Trump's desire to divide us up, if you are prepared to stand up to the greed and corruption of the corporate elite,
the fight over immigration, whether we're immigrants or not, that we pick up the fight on how our children are losing out in public education, whether we have children in public education or not, that we pick up these fights, that we pick up the importance of protecting our pensions, whether we have a pension, whether we're decades away from a pension.
If you're a Sanders supporter, this burns. This burns. For all intents and purposes, she's gone so far as to take his speech. I mean, this is, I guess you can't call it specifically plagiarism, but you can listen to it as a human being and say, wait a minute, she's literally taken a motif, powerful one at that, and added it to her own stump speech, effectively, again, aping him. That burns. It burns because if you're a Sanders supporter, for the most part, you know, he believes it. He means it. And he's been believing this and meaning this for the last 30, 40 years. He has a record of consistency. Sanders puts out this: the federal minimum wage at the beginning of the decade versus the federal minimum wage at the end of the decade. We need a living minimum wage of at least $15 an hour. This and this. Warren, a little bit later, on the 19th, puts out this: 10-year challenge. Federal minimum wage in 2009. Federal minimum wage in 2019. Raise the wage. Now, again, she supported somebody who didn't want to put the wage to $15 an hour and aped him. Sanders came out with this last week. Warren comes out with this on the 24th. That burns. You're pretending to be somebody you are not. And you're doing it for the specific reason of winning a presidential election. I told you, I am very dodgy about people, quote unquote, evolving at a presidential election. Especially in this very specific race, where there is one person who's putting this stuff out that means it, because he's been saying this stuff even when he was in the wilderness. He meant it. Warren is doing this entirely to, quote unquote, win the election. Look at this. Jay Inslee is right. The Keystone XL pipeline is a harmful project that locks us into further dependence on some of the dirtiest fossil fuels on the planet. We need clean energy and protection for tribal lands, not another crummy fossil fuel investment. The mendacity of this campaign knows no bounds. This is why it aggravates me for the apologists. Elizabeth Warren, who called herself a Native American for 40 fucking years, and then all of a sudden changed it somewhere along the way where she just accepted being white on her license, on her law license in Texas as Native American. Despite that person calling themselves a Native American for that long and assuming this identity of another group, essentially Rachel Dole, when those people were getting sprayed with freezing water in the freezing cold, when they were getting their arms blown off, when they were being exposed to harassments and beatings and having dogs sicked on them by these oil police at the behest of an oil company that tried to take their land, subsume their lands. They made the point that you're going to destroy our water system. Not to mention it was a racist endeavor in the first place because the original place that it was supposed to go to was supposed to be through a white area. You know who was silent? This person. This person. The person who's running for president now talking about tribal lands. That person didn't say anything until Obama came out and said something, at which point it was then okay for her to put out a notice. This burns. This burns. You know who did say something? Sanders. Sanders was the one who came out and said something about it. You know who else who said something? Tulsi Gabbard. If I'm not mistaken, Tulsi Gabbard even went to Standing Rock. You know who didn't say squat? Who's now screaming about tribal lands? This woman. This woman. It's amazing how people evolve when they start to run for president of the United States. I, as a Sanders supporter who points this out, am not wrong for doing so. In fact, I watch, when my wife was watching the show the other day, she got so angry when Warren came on. And it shocked me. I was like, wow, is this my wife? Now, usually she's more chill on this stuff than I am. But frustration is born about by this kind of interception of the goal. Meaning the difficulty of me trying to accomplish the objective I want. I want Sanders in office because I want somebody who's a fighter for the proletariat that I know is that way, that I know flesh to bone, that I full well believe is that way because a guy goes so far as to even call himself a socialist. I know he's that way because of the reaction to the other Democrats, meaning when they look at him in horror, I know he's that way. I know he is different. When Trump says this in his speech, when he comes out and attacks Sanders in his presidential speech, and I see the reaction of the other Democrats.
To our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
That's Warren. That's Warren at the bottom of the screen, standing up. That's Elizabeth Warren. When all of these other Democrats stand up and applaud Trump in this, they call him every name but a child of God. But on that very particular point, he had a very specific person that he was attacking. All of these other Democrats stand up, including Elizabeth Warren. There are a lot of people who are apologists for Warren. They're apologists. Meaning, I don't care if somebody is supporting Warren just because they have all of these various issues that they may think and they earnestly support her. I do care when people are lefties, when they call themselves lefties. And I accept that they're lefties. And they still come out and breathlessly, not just defend Warren, but make it seem as if Sanders and Warren are somehow similar to one another. And by doing so, outright subverting the years that Sanders has put into this, subverting his consistency, subverting the fact that when he created the space in the first place, that Warren wouldn't even support him when he came out in 2016, standing up, applauding Trump when Trump is literally attacking him in the president Congress, and now is outright, flagrantly aping him. And they still apologize for this aping as if they can't see what is taking place, and that we, who point this out, are somehow being unfair to her. That we are somehow being unfair to her, as opposed to them being unfair to Sanders and his authenticity and consistency over the years, as opposed to this corporate lawyer who pretended to be a Native American who is now pretending to be Sanders. Stop apologizing for her. Her mendacity knows no bounds. And when I make the point that she is a fraud, I don't say that because I think that. I say that as almost as an absolute flat fact. She has taken a very specific strategy to pretend to be somebody else, meaning by definition, just the way in which she operates, she's being a fraud. That's not what I think. That's not what I think. Do you know that Warren, at one point, at a 3 a.m. between her and her God, even came to the same conclusion? This is her writing. Cal was right. The sentence was there. Oh, so right here, Warren is talking about a sentence in her interview, something that she said when she was being interviewed. She said, Cal was right. The sentence was there. Incredibly, I said, I created much of the intellectual foundation for what they, Occupy Wall Street, do. Now, later on, she says, I was deeply embarrassed. My words sounded so puffy and self-important, and they made it seem as if I was trying to take credit for a protest I wasn't even a part of. Even she realized that at a point she had a potential to say things that weren't true in order to make herself seem to be a part of something that she was never a part of. That in no way stops her apologists for backing up Warren, for giving her credit for stuff that she shouldn't get credit for, and for even pretending as if that the quantity of Sanders, even going before the election, or even going by what you know of her, is somehow similar to the quality of Warren. I'm sorry, the quality of Warren is somehow similar to the quality of Sanders. I want to talk about this briefly. Her apologists, just stop. Be it Ryan Grimm, be it Emma Vigeland, or even Jay Paul, just stop. You're not only doing a discredit to what I believe you guys want to see accomplished in the world, but you are actually subverting it. You're making it worse. You have two quantities in the race. One quantity is literally an echo of the other quantity and pretending to be that quantity when there is nothing there to have any real belief that these two things are similar. And yet, just because she says so, that is in and of itself enough for the apologists. It's not enough for me, nor should it be enough for you. To the apologists of Warren, please just stop. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. If you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support. PayPal patron. This video will be brief. When Warren was asked about Venezuela and Bolivia, and before we get into that, let's say it this way. I tend to not like these terms progressive. I don't like labels, albeit, and I know I've named myself the Progressive Soapbox, but I do that as a shorthand for people to have some general idea of what the show is about. You can have a general idea of a particular definition, but within that general idea, there's all sorts of caveats, there's all sorts of gradations. Barack Obama has called himself a progressive. Other people have called him such. Hillary Clinton has called herself progressive on occasion. The word itself has lost all meaning to what it is. Let's define our terms. If you tend to be anti-war, if you tend to be for Medicare for all, if you tend to be for an immigration policy that's somewhat sane, there's certain traits that go with this notion of being a quote-unquote lefty. Having one or two of those traits may not necessarily make you a lefty. Rand Paul is anti-war. Ron Paul is anti-war. Does that make him a lefty? I don't think anybody will say such. Just because Elizabeth Warren wants a wealth tax, and I believe her from the standpoint of the stuff on Wall Street, and I agree with her on that. I've backed her up on that, given her credit on that, on more than one occasion. I said if she had the opportunity to punch a banker in the throat and get away with it, she would probably do such. Agreed. Is that the only quality necessary to be called a progressive, though? And that's the nub of it. Just because you have one or two qualities that make you, yes, I like this, and this is somewhat of a progressive take on this, does not mean the entirety that the individual is a progressive. Can we stop with that? This is aggravating to me. It's as if they take one quality of her and blow it up to everything else. Elizabeth Warren, when asked about Venezuela, had a policy that was synonymous with Trump, Pompeo, and John Bolton. Go look at the interview, Pod Save America. When talked about Bolivia, she gave this mealy-mouthed approach. And if she felt that way about Venezuela, I don't know why she would have that difference of opinion on Bolivia. Ryan Grimm had to drag her to the trough to say anything about Bolivia. And listen to what she said. Then listen to how she said it. And listen to Ryan Grimm, an apologist for her, leading her on this issue because she was never going to come out this way herself.
OAS, which is largely funded by the U.S., is blamed by a lot of the Morales supporters for triggering the coup. Do you believe that the OAS is an impartial actor, or do you think that they're kind of operating on behalf of some of the more powerful?
Now, just so we clear what happened here, an apologist, who I like Grimm. This apologist is talking to Warren, and in this interview, he's introduced several items to lead her. OAS, funded by the U.S., it's a coup, etc. Now, what is Warren supposed to say here? She's standing in front of Ryan Grimm. Ryan Grimm is asking her these questions. She needs to know what to say to sound like a progressive. Ryan Grimm has already essentially told her what she needs to say. She needs to just say something to the effect of agreeing with what Ryan Grimm said. Now, Ryan Grimm, however, would take her answer as if Warren has finally said something about Bolivia. She was dragged to the trough and then gave a mealy-mouthed answer after such. Listen to this.
Forces there.
The OAS is the one that comes in to certify elections, and it's reasonable that people would depend on the OAS to be an independent body. Even so, that does not justify military intervention. When the military are pushing for change in government, that's not.
Warren's original mealy-mouthed answer got across to people that she is not a lefty. And then when Ryan Grimm goes to her and introduces a ton of information for her to run with, this is not indicative of somebody who necessarily believes the same thing that Ryan Grimm believes on this issue. He just introduced a bunch of information for her to play off. This is not the same thing as Sanders coming out saying right off the bat, this is a coup, the military should not be involved in this process, etc., etc. On Israel, when they were outright murdering people, 2,200 people died in that, Elizabeth Warren was still out there arguing that Israel needs to be able to defend itself, despite the fact that it's, quote-unquote, defending itself to the tune of over 2,000 deaths, 80% of which were civilians. Sanders has come out and gone so far as to say our military aid to Israel needs to be tethered to whether or not they can get some level of peace deal, and even brings up Palestinian and Palestinian rights within the context of that conversation. These two quantities are not the same. Warren does not have a foreign policy outside of the Democratic Party foreign policy, which is outright neocons. And even in the context of the military budget, when one of the other apologists, Emma Vigeland, questioned Warren on that, a decent question again, her response, oh, you mean should we cut the military budget? The military budget is corrupt. And yet she voted for that corrupt military budget. Sanders didn't. On issues of foreign policy, these two quantities are not the same. Please stop pretending as if they are. And then the big one, Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren has come out with a public option. There's nothing wrong with a public option for Medicare for all. The problem here is that Elizabeth Warren has pretended to be for Medicare for all for the past 3 or 4 months. Back in 2013, she was entirely against it. She even goes back and says, oh, not me. I'm not for single payer at all. But all of a sudden, again, for the presidency, she evolved. And she screamed that she was for Medicare for all for these 3 months. I said she was not. I said there is nothing in the way that she talks about this that will make it seem like she's for Medicare for all. Medicare for all, absolutely. It's a bill. You're either for it or you're not. And these people who are arguing that they are for something that is not the bill is intentionally being disingenuous, trying to attach whatever they have to make that look good because of Medicare for all. It's like the way beer commercials will have scantily clad women holding on to a beer as if those women care anything about the beer. They just want to associate something that is positive with something else. That's all that is. Vigeland and many of these other people acted as if this woman was for Medicare for all. And then when she comes out with her plan, Ryan Graham comes out and says, this is a Rorschach test. This is a Rorschach test. This is a good Rorschach test. If you didn't trust Warren fight for Medicare for all, you've confirmed. If you still think she'll fight for it, navigating political obstacles like cost and fear of change, you think that the plan is much down closer to happening. Think about what he just said. You know what Elizabeth Warren's Medicare for all plan is. It's Pete's plan. Is Ryan Grimm okay with Pete's plan? And if Ryan Grimm is not okay with Pete's plan, why is Ryan Grimm, Vigeland, and some of these other people, or even Jay Paul, okay with Warren's plan? Just because somebody says something doesn't mean that they mean it. And the fact is, when people show you what they are, accept it. She screamed she was for Medicare for all. The issue is not that she's pushing a public option. The issue, and my point is, she's being flagrantly disingenuous and pretending to be like somebody else. And it's utterly and entirely dishonest. The Medicare for all plan that she put out has no plan, no potential for ever passing. She's putting out a public plan, public option. That's what it is. All the energy for Medicare for all would be sapped out of it. Nobody believes that she would get 2 bites at the apple for her particular plan. This is a plan specifically designed to fail and to end up potentially, maybe, at a public option. Do you honestly believe that Ryan Grimm, if he was looking at somebody like Pete Buttigieg who's saying it, wouldn't notice that? And wouldn't call him on that and call BS on that? You honestly believe that? Emma Vigeland goes so far as to say it's Warren's vagina that's the issue. She has a vagina, man. That's the problem. You think I'm joking? Since her peak in the polls, Warren has been trying to please everyone and is not pleasing anyone. She overthinks everything and is immensely frustrating to watch. As a woman, I sympathize with her socially embedded inclination to please all sides. I know it's hard for men to understand, but it's a very real thing. Is it that she has a vagina, or is it that she's a political actor who's running a political campaign that ran that political campaign as being flagrantly dishonest in the sense of trying to ape a socialist? Is it that, or is it that she's a woman? Personally, I think the woman thing is a bit sexist, if I'm being honest, as opposed to her being a political actor whose agency in this and her plan of trying to achieve the primary nomination is to pretend to be like the socialists in the room. Her plan on ice. Sanders wants to get rid of it. Warren says it's necessary. I guess I'm making the point that it just based on policy stuff, she's not a progressive. And her campaign has been flagrantly dishonest and pretending to be like the other lefty that's in the race. What is her issue with honesty? Listen to this.
You might be okay because I read that your children went to private school.
No, my children went to public school.
But you might be okay because I read that your children went to private school.
No, my children went to public school.
But
Her kids didn't go to public school. That's not true. That's not true. Again, dishonest. The thing about private school questioning Warren is that the Democratic candidates have been asked this cycle after cycle. Warren was unprepared for a perpetual question and solved this by fibbing. She solved it by fibbing. Why is she this dishonest? And why are the apologists, the lefties who consider themselves lefties? Look at this, Ryan Grimm. He writes an article. In 3 touchstone speeches, Elizabeth Warren grounds her campaign in essentially movements. Movements. In 3 touchstone speeches, Elizabeth Warren grounds her campaign in history of American protests and movement building. Are you serious? I read to you where she herself was talking about Occupy Wall Street and she had no hand in it. Warren has not been a part of any movements. None. Labor, workers, women, none of those things. The woman was a Republican and a corporate lawyer. And yet, he will write a puff piece like this of Warren just saying stuff, as if the fact that she says it somehow has any legitimacy to it being a real thing, as opposed to her just trying to get through the primary. I'm going to end this. I don't want to rant. It just annoys the hell out of me. And one last person, Jayapal. Warren has put out her Medicare plan that is only Pete's plan. If Jayapal is for Pete's plan, she needs to say so. But if Jayapal is not for Pete's plan, then she needs to stop pretending as if Warren's plan is for Medicare for all. Right here. Progressive Caucus leader Jayapal had a message for fellow supporters of Medicare for all. Unite against the moderates and don't fight about whether Warren's plan is too mild compared to Sanders. I understand that people have their favorites. Jayapal, who has not endorsed anybody in the race. Right here, longtime advocate of the issue. We are better off having two presidential candidates endorsing Medicare for all than having one. But that's the point, right? Rational human being can look at what Warren put out. And a rational human being can say, politically speaking, this looks like a plan that was designed entirely to fail. She wants to support Medicare for all, meaning she wants to advocate for Medicare for all. By the same token, in reality, meaning she wants credit for being part of a person who's supporting Medicare for all. But in reality of things, she's only supporting a public option. Politically, her plan has no plan for success. Jayapal's perspective is, well, let's just pretend that if she is for Medicare for all, and let's just support both candidates anyway. That's lunacy! If you are indeed a lefty, and if there are things in the world that you want to see from the standpoint of foreign policy and domestic policy, fair enough. But let's just be honest. And I would say be honest with yourself if you're pushing this stuff out for Warren. No one in their right mind, honestly, politically believes that the plan that Warren put out, the public option, that Pete's plan, has any real plan of success. She will not get 2 bites at the apple. The stocks that surged know that she won't get 2 bites at the apple and know that ultimately she's talking about a public option. She just didn't want to say she was for a public option. She just wanted to run as if she was for Medicare for all because she knows it's popular. The issue here is dishonesty. I could go through several issues, but I guess my point is, stop telling me that this woman is a progressive. Stop pretending as if she's supporting Medicare for all. Stop pretending as if she's a part of some kind of movements just because she espouses that she's with a particular movement, that she has no connection to it all. Stop apologizing for her. I'm not saying lie. I'm not saying even ding her. I'm saying just be honest. She has ran a campaign where she has pretended to be like Sanders. That has been her campaign strategy from day one. That campaign strategy on its face is fundamentally dishonest because she is not like Sanders. She's not like him on foreign policy across the board, nor is she like him even in many respects on domestic policy. You can make an argument that one thing, or having this notion of a wealth tax, or being against Wall Street, in and of itself does not necessarily make you a progressive. I appreciate the fact that she's against the Wall Street stuff. I don't appreciate this other stuff. And fact of the matter is, I don't know why you even believe this other stuff, considering she's just put out her Medicare plan that is Pete's plan. And what does this mean for the host of other plans that she's put out that ultimately, once again, from a policy position, just apes the positions that Sanders had for the past 30 years. And again, showing you the stuff of aping his speeches and aping the stuff that he puts out. I am right on this. And I'm sorry, this is a Rorschach test, but this is a Rorschach test for the apologists to ask why do they feel they need to defend her so fervently when item by item shows that she is being dishonest. There's 2 people in the race. There's one guy for Medicare for all, and if Jayapal is really for Medicare for all, she is subverting her chances of getting Medicare for all by supporting somebody who is not. If Grimm and Vigeland have this real vision of the world from the standpoint of foreign policy and domestic policy, then you are subverting your chances of getting those things accomplished by supporting somebody who is not. For the apologists, please, just stop. Just stop. let's see who's here. And I'll end it here. This video has gone too long. And again, I don't want to get on videos and rant. And I try to show exactly what I'm talking about in regards to the way I process this stuff. I mean, but this goes further than that. Even if the campaign finance stuff, her dumping money from the Senate thing into the race, saying I'm not going to take money, but has elements in her campaign still reaching out to wealthy donors. What about that, Ryan? How about going into a story on that? That her elements of her campaign are still reaching out to wealthy donors in order to make that stuff, make those connections, despite the fact she's saying she's not going to take money. What about her dumping money from her primary, from her Senate race into the primary and pretending as if she was grassroots funded? She has been flagrantly dishonest. Why would a candidate say they'll take money in the general but not in the primary? It's to stand beside Sanders and pretend to be a one-to-one. But again, the key word in that is pretend to be a one-to-one. She was perfectly willing to take it when she got out the general. None of the stuff digs into her. All of the stuff are just political gamesmanship. It's all out of political expedience. This is not me thinking she's a fraud. This is item by item by item where you can point to that says she doesn't mean what she say. And fact is, the Medicare for All thing should have been a telltale sign to you. If she's been screaming about Medicare for All for 3 months and then puts out Pete's plan, then an honest broker who's looking at this should say, this is not Medicare for All. This has no chance of becoming law. In fact, her chances of getting it through are weaker in 3 years, as opposed to the mandate Congress that she would need to get it passed. But that's not what the apologists say. That's not what they say. Megan Morales, what are your thoughts on those who argue that criticizing Warren could result in her supporters to never support Bernie? I say this as a Bernie supporter. No, and I accept that. I think that's perfectly fair. And Sanders, for his part, has gone through this race without attacking Warren. He hasn't criticized her. In fact, even on elements that he should have, to his supporter chagrin, he has not criticized her. Because for that very specific reasons. The catch here is they have two different bases. Their bases are different. There are elements of the Warren supporters that would support Sanders, meaning I think it's like 23% or something like that went from Sanders to Warren. But the problem here is her specific strategy entirely depends on nobody bringing up the fact that this is a strategy that is dishonest. My issue is not if Warren would have ran this race, just as her, not pretending to be anybody else, just her. She would have had a public option. She would have been angry and vicious against Wall Street. And her foreign policy would be where her foreign policy is now. You can make an argument for that. Like, I don't begrudge anybody else for being in the race. Tulsi is her own formed character. Buttigieg is his own formed character. Biden is on. All of these other people are who they are and they're running as they are. She's not. She's not. It is fair to say that some Warren supporters may take issue with me bringing this stuff up, but I've lied about nothing. Everything I said in this video is absolutely true. You can say, well, you can give her the benefit of the doubt a little bit more on this stuff, but from the standpoint of the cacophony of it, not to mention it's clear that that's her political strategy. I mean, I understand it, and I think that's a fair point, and I think there would be some people who get pissed off at Sanders supporters who are going after Warren. Fair point. But if there was a chance that you were ever going to support Sanders, does me pointing out that Warren has been dishonest in this campaign, does that change that? If their identity is associated and wrapped up in Warren, maybe. I suspect those people will most likely go to Kamala Harris or somebody else, or Buttigieg, meaning they're supporting her for reasons that go beyond me being a Sanders supporter. I don't know. I don't know. It's possible, but I think it's also possible to wake people up for them to say, yeah, he's right. Marcus Will, I don't like beating a dead horse here, but it's totally on Bernie to call Warren out. Can't blame her fans for going along with both Bernie and Warren. But I can blame them. And I don't blame all of them. There are some people who fervently believe what Warren is saying, which is my angst, which is my annoyance with this. Grimm, Vigeland, and Jayapal give credibility to stuff that shouldn't be given credibility to. Yes, I can blame the media in this case that is supposed to be lefty media for giving credibility to somebody who should have none in this very specific instance of items, especially with the Medicare for All thing. That's an outright betrayal to her supporters who thought she was actually for this and bought the hype on this. But Grimm, Vigeland, and Jayapal only make this worse, and they only give her credibility on issues where she should not be getting credibility on. That's my point, Marcus Will. That's why I said the apologists need to stop. You have two people in this race. There's an element of her support that is being that should be with Sanders from an ideological standpoint. Meaning, all things being equal, if this was based on ideology and they did not buy that these two people were one-to-one, they would, all things being equal, be with Sanders. The Jayapals, the Grimms, and the Viglins of the world give her credibility on these various issues. I am not asking them to lie. I'm not asking them to bash her. I am just asking them to be honest with themselves and looking at this particular candidate. And if Buttigieg had came out with, it kept saying he was for Medicare for all, and then came out with Pete's plan, I strongly suspect that Grim, Jayapal, Jayapal, or Viglin would take such a kind eye towards Pete Buttigieg. Even though, for all intents and purposes, these are the same plants, with sprinkling around the edges. Rob R., this is gross now. Elizabeth Warren now says her camp is a movement. Yes. She's arguing movement. And Ryan Grimm is helping her. Even though she has no experience being with any movement. How can I not be aggravated at this? I find myself getting more and more aggravated at the apologists. Her supporters don't bother me in the least. It's the apologists. Mick Morales, I've learned this weekend that Jayapal is endorsing Warren over Bernie despite their Medicare for all differences. The co-chair of Progressive Caucus in the House is sad. Yes. And by the way, I said this earlier in several tweets. I said, I wish Jayapal would just go ahead and endorse Warren already as opposed to behind the scenes, helping her. And that makes this article that much worse. If Jayapal would have came out in the beginning and just said, I'm backing Warren, great. She didn't do that. She stayed behind the scenes as if she was supporting both candidates or potentially supporting both candidates and proclaiming that Warren stuff is Medicare for all. That's nonsense. If you're going to support your candidate, support your candidate. Don't fib, don't lie and say that what she's saying is Medicare for all, because it's not. And ultimately, you're subverting any potential of getting Medicare for all passed by doing this. Not sure why you don't understand this. Warren's support isn't that they're food. She's a progressive. They're Clinton supporters watching a Marvel movie. Bernie or guillotine. Good point. Bernie or guillotine. They're low information voters like the majority of Americans. She sounds good enough in sound bites. Orange man bad. That's all we have to know for support. Well, if that's true, have you ever seen a poll of Democratic primary using theoretical ranked choice selection? Curious how you think that looks. Sanders wins in a landslide, in my honest opinion. Ranked choice voting, yes. And ranked choice, yeah. But keep in mind, in ranked choice, you get two choices. The catch is, there's some voters that think Sanders is risky. So you might have like an older African-American voter who likes what he says, but thinks Joe Biden is more electable. And a ranked choice in that situation, he wins in a landslide. It's easy. They would just say Sanders won, the other person two, and they'd be shocked as shit to find out that the overwhelming majority of people were thinking just like them. But that's ranked choice. We are not in a ranked choice system. As for low information voters, yes, that's kind of true. But that's kind of the point of this video, right? There are a lot of people who would look at Warren and Sanders and say, close enough. She has a vagina. They say similar things. Close enough. The point in my video is that you have people like Grimm, like Viglin, like Jayapal, that tries to give credibility to her in areas where she should have none. For fuck's sake, Ryan Grimm is writing an article about Warren associated with labor history or history of movements. And while I imagine that's probably a really good article from a historical standpoint, it's lunacy to pretend as if Warren has any association with these movements despite talking about it. She was a corporate lawyer. She was a Republican, for God's sakes. Sanders, through and through, does. Writing an article on her about this, just because she says it, makes it seem, again, as if these quantities are similar when they are not. The very act of boosting her subverts the person that is really that way. And that's the part that I'm aggravated about. These people who say they want certain things in the world and yet are giving this kind of boost or this credibility, legitimacy to somebody who, for the most part, in no way exudes those things in any real way as a comparison to the other person in the race that does. Yes, it's aggravating. It's aggravating. Grimm and Vigeland can write about anything that they want, but at this point, if it really is the goal, the option, the objective, first potential in my lifetime to get somebody like this in office, and if they honestly, full well, have that same idea of the world, and they're supposed to be lefties, then pushing the person who's not a lefty is a problem. And again, let me define my terms when I say progressive. I just mean it's fair enough to say that Warren dislikes bankers. It's fair enough to say that she would probably try to push through a wealth tax. It's fair enough to say at this point, because she has essentially stuck herself to the wall on a public option, that she may try to pass a public option. I don't know what Warren is, because Warren has pretended to be somebody else. And so on a host of other issues, she seems to be dishonest. The healthcare issue. And then she has climate, criminal justice, all this stuff. None of the stuff she believed in before she started running in the race. All of these things are just apings of positions of Sanders. And you have people who say they back Sanders, by the same token, giving credence to things that she has no experience, no history of, and giving that legitimacy. Yes, it bugs me. It bugs me to no end. And I understand the frustration is brought about by the contest itself. And I have no issue with these guys, writing their articles about whatever they want to write their articles on. And if it's something Warren is doing positive, she should get credit on that. But there should be deep and abiding skepticism on issues where it comes across as if she's just pretending to be somebody else. I'm sorry, that has been the key strategy, political strategy of her campaign, purely for political expedience. It aggravates me because there is somebody in the race that is legitimate and authentic. And you would think that all of the lefties would focus on that. By the way, Cedar, Brooks, both of them have gotten that very specific trait because they understand what's at stake. It's aggravating. It's fucking aggravating. Elizabeth Warren doesn't have much hardcore support. Most are low information voters. That is who Bernie should be trying to reach, like Tulsi isn't reaching hardcore Trump fans. The thing is, and I think Sanders is right on this ultimately, she can only go so far legitimately. And right now she's hitting her peak. But I think that's because Buttigieg is eating to her base. Whether they're low information voters or not, I consider these people the limousine liberals of the group. Some of them, however, do take her shtick as being legit. And the catch becomes, how do you get those voters? And how do you show those voters that what she's saying is just an aping, an echo of the actual person? That's the catch. And that's my, annoyance and aggravation. There is a chance for something magnificent in this country and even in this world. And the lefties, who dedicatedly call themselves lefties, and who I honestly believe are, for whatever reason, have either associations with Warren or have this kind of weird commitment to her. And in doing stories and whatnot, they take a very kind eye. An eye so kind, in fact, that I would say is not indicative of reality. I point this out because at this point, they need to have a come to Jesus. Come to Jesus. Bernie or guillotine, yes, you know that. People here know that. Most Americans don't. They got their information from SNL skits. We need to get in the streets and shut shit down. I feel you. Just aggravated. I'll end this here because this video has gone 45 minutes. And I gotta be honest, this video wasn't supposed to go this long. I am silent. Bernie will endorse Warren. Yeah, don't do that. D. Martin, Jamarl campaigning for Bernie. At the same time, he'll mention particulars about Sanders that he doesn't like to remain credible. There are a ton of things I don't like about Sanders. And by the way, as we go through, I point those out. People, oftentimes, when I say something about Tulsi, they're like, well, Bernie did this. And I was like, yeah, you can look at the video where I said he did that and I didn't like it. My allegiance is to ideological points of view or things that I want to see accomplished. That allegiance doesn't waver. If Sanders came out when he supported Clinton, I went on and bashed Sanders. I have several videos bashing Sanders. Do you realize there were several Bernie groups that kicked me out? Kicked me out, barred me from going into the group because I would say things that I didn't like about Sanders. My job, my goal, my objective, very specific political objectives in a row. My support for you is in line with towing those objectives. If I believe you, you get my support. If I honestly believed Warren was what she says she was, I would back her. I wouldn't have any issue backing her. I wouldn't have had no issue at all supporting Warren if I thought she was earnest about those objectives and I thought she could beat Trump. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. If Sanders flaked, I'd call him on it and I have a history of calling him on it. I mean, come on. Adam Charlton, a tax increase means you have free quality health care, so people paying for health care will be saving money. Yes, don't believe in it ever. Yes, that's true. That's true. Yes, you increase middle class taxes. By the same token, it's a income increase more than a generation. Think of it in terms of progressive legislation. I mean, ultimately, you pay by yourself for your health care. And Sanders' argument is, why are we doing that? That's something that everybody requires. It's something that you can't get away from. For all intents and purposes, that's a tax. That's just a tax that you're not paying to the government. However, if you were paying that tax to the government, we could use progressive legislation in order to lower the amount that you pay for your health care, essentially each according to their needs. I agree with that whole hog, especially if you're getting rid of all the bills and everything else from the standpoint of healthcare, with the exception of a $200 price increase. Cost of drugs. Just aggravate it. I'll leave it here. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks.